First is some breaking news out of Libya, where its deputy defense minister says government troops have taken control of Tarhuna. That's the last stronghold of warlord Khalifa Haftar in western Libya, about 65 kilometers from the capital, Tripoli. On Friday, the UN-recognized government announced it had regained full control of Tripoli. Haftar's forces still hold large swathes of territory in the east and the south of the country. Sami Hamdi is the editor-in-chief of the online magazine International Interest. He's joining us now from London. Sami, good to have you with us as always. Just give us an indication why Tarhuna particularly is so important.
Haftar's offensive on Tripoli had two key strongholds. It was launched from two key strongholds. The first was Al-Watiya, the air base that was taken not too long ago, and the second was Tarhuna. After the fall of Al-Watiya, Haftar's forces knew that they could not hold on to the Tripoli offensive, so they began to withdraw some of their troops. And Tarhuna, or the news from Tarhuna, comes after the GNA went to Moscow and after a meeting between Erdogan and Sarraj, the president of the GNA, where it's believed that Turkey and Russia are now negotiating a framework of cooperation. So Tarhuna today, it's unclear whether it fell because of the military attack by the GNA forces or whether this is part of a negotiated exchange between the Russians and between the Turks with regards to Libya. But in terms of its significance, it means the complete end of Haftar's Tripoli offensive, and the military solution that Haftar offered to those powers that wanted a military solution is no longer on the table, and we're back to the status quo as it was before the beginning of the Tripoli offensive, east and west.
Sami, you say that this is significant in terms of the balance of power, but Haftar still controls significant parts of Libya itself. So what happens next? Are we likely to see some sort of resurgence from Haftar's forces?
I think it's important not to get carried away with, I know there's a lot of people very happy with the end of Haftar's military solution, and anybody who wants to negotiate a political solution should celebrate the fact that Haftar's Tripoli offensive has failed. However, as you said, it's important to put it into context. This is the end of Haftar's bid to completely win in the civil war. This is what we're seeing today is a return to the status quo, the stalemate that we saw for many years between East and between West. And this prospect of a military campaign eastwards is very unlikely. And the reason I say this is that the biggest dynamic is not necessarily in the military terms. The biggest dynamic is the changing in power brokers. It's no longer EU, it's no longer European countries, it's no longer UAE or Egypt or these countries. It's now Russia on the eastern side and Turkey on the western side. Almost a repeat of Syria in the sense that these are the countries that are going to be pushing the parties to decide what the future of Libya should look like. And that's why we're hearing talks of partition, talks of autonomous regions, talks of a status quo whereby West will be Turkey-influenced GNA and East will be Tobruk-influenced Russia. So in other words, what we're seeing today is not a complete alternating of the dynamics of the war. We're seeing a return to the status quo that was in 2019 before the start of the Tripoli offensive, and the road ahead to find some sort of solution to the war is still very long, and if anything, even more complicated now because of the ferocity of the international struggle, a resurgent US, a very angry France, a confused Germany, and Italy that is scrambling, Russia which is asserting itself, Turkey which is now the dominant power. In other words, it looks far more complicated and far more complex than it looked 2 or 3 years ago.
Let's talk about that potential political solution. What role, if any, can Khalifa Haftar hope to have in that political solution?
It's interesting that the GNA or members of the GNA have actually called for the MPs in Tobruk to come and join them. In other words, this idea of trying to merge the two institutions. What is also interesting is that supporters of the GNA and supporters of the Tobruk government have absolutely lambasted the suggestion, with many supporters of GNA saying that Tobruk should be held to account for the crimes that it has done. And it is these attitudes that are very worrying. The attitude that hasn't changed from 2011, where we saw revenge attacks, reprisals, we saw punishment, this idea of compensation that alienated and polarized Libyan society and created an environment for Khalifa Haftar to thrive. It appears that many GNA supporters have not learned the lessons from 2011. If we want a political solution, the GNA now has a golden opportunity to present a unified front this idea of a unified Libya, but it needs to have the magnanimity in order to set aside those grievances. And it looks like the GNA will not be able to do that. And this is why a political solution will look more distant. We have to remember that a political solution cannot come about until the narrative on Libya changes, until it becomes one in which all the Libyans have grievances, all the Libyans suffered under 2011, and it needs a leadership that recognizes that, not a leadership that believes in its right to rule, and not a leadership that believes that it has the right to take revenge on other sections of the Libyan population. The GNA has a golden opportunity to bring about some unified stance, to invite the people of Tobruk, but I fear that the GNA has not learned the lessons of 2011, and whereas it now has an opportunity to reach out to the east, to reach out to the Libyan people, it seems that GNA, understandably so, are very caught up in their own grievances, very caught up in this midst of this victory that they've secured on the military tide, that they are about to lose a golden opportunity to help facilitate a complete altering of the socio-political dynamics that none of the international powers could ever hope to bring.
Good to get your thoughts on this, as always. Sami Hamdi, we appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed.